Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Slice of Pie video blog. My name is Paula Morris and I'm the Senior Director at Pie Marketing Solutions. And I'm joined today with Lisa Perry, a Senior Account Director from TechComms, which is a PR agency specifically focused on the B2B tech space. Hello, Lisa, and welcome to the session today.
Thank you, Paula.
So what we're going to do for the next 10 or 15 minutes is kind of really talk around some of the things that you see in the marketing world from a PR and comms angle, specifically looking at best practices around how the traditional marketing function, and most notably demand generation as a function, and PR and comms can really work together in a more integrated way, and some of the best practices and some of the key things that you're seeing, particularly in the tech space, around how those two key functions within the marketing area can come together and really kind of drive growth and alignment between that from an integrated approach. So we'll spend a few minutes kind of going through what you currently see, some of the key learnings and best practices, and then any kind of tips and tricks or case studies that you've seen in the marketing around some actionable insights for the audience today. So that's the structure of the video blog today. So without further ado, just to kickstart, in terms of organisationally and some of the things that you're seeing within your client base and some of the experience over the years, do you tend to see that the traditional corporate PR function in the comms area tends to be separate to marketing? Is that something that you kind of feel, and is that still happening out in the marketplace today?
To be honest, Paula, it really comes down to the type of organisation and the structure in the organisation. So there are some organisations that I've worked in when I was in-house, but also clients that I work with now, whereby the PR team is completely separate to the marketing team. But then also there's organisations whereby the PR team is integrated into the marketing team. So it really varies on the type of business, the size of the organisation and the structure that they have. But saying that, in my experience, I would say that I've always seen complete alignment. So whether they're one team or two separate disciplines, I would say it's always been aligned. And it goes without saying, really, that it's absolutely essential, obviously, for all the key stakeholders, so the investors, the employees, the journalists, the suppliers, and of course, the customers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more that they can, integrate it and be aligned, as you're saying, on the messaging, then you're all, singing from the same hymn sheet and start to really see kind of like the secret sauce of seeing everything, kind of grow. So yeah, I think it's interesting that, that it's still considered sometimes separate, but as you say, it depends on the type of client. So yeah, kind of an interesting view. But particularly for this year, with everything going on a macro level, and there's so many, unknowns in the market. And I think we're all, looking at this from a digital perspective, and more digital is prevalent and the main channel, obviously, with the challenges that we're facing. What is kind of some of the best practices, and from your perspective, of how that alignment between the two different functions and within marketing can come together, and whether you've seen any best practices, of how that can be achieved? So yeah, be interesting to get your thoughts of why it's so prevalent this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say a couple of things there. I think it's always been important, but like you said, this year, and last year, obviously, it was so important. There's budgets cut, resources cut. We're down to one channel of communication being digital. It's tough at the moment. So I would say the most important thing is collaboration, absolutely collaboration. So like I said, whether those teams are separate or all come under one team, the most important thing is to keep aligned. With our clients, we meet with them on a regular basis. So some are every other week, some are quarterly, some are biannually. But for the quarterly ones, we always work with the marketing team as well as the comms team as well, just to kind of go over the messages, go over the campaign, go over the plan, make sure that we're aligned. So, we're looking at things like goals, we're looking at target audiences, we're looking at timings, budget, strategy, but also the measurement metrics, which I think sometimes is forgotten, which is a bit crazy, really, because how could you ever look at a campaign and think whether it was successful or not, if you don't measure it? So I would say definitely collaboration. Another thing I would say is that often we find that when we come into a team meeting with our clients, when there's marketing, when there's communications, PR, when everyone's all together, often what will happen is the field marketing team, they'll share their messages with us, and we will look from a PR standpoint and we'll see how we can use them, how they can emulate with journalists, how, will they resonate with journalist audience readers, for example. And often, yes, which is great because it does show complete alignment. But then there is the odd occasion where sometimes those marketing messages are a little bit too self-serving for PR. So there are some that will often, perhaps alleviate a little bit, or make sure that they're completely relevant, really,
and make them newsworthy. You need to make it click worthy and newsworthy from your perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. So I think it's really important, obviously, to stay completely aligned, and make sure that you are all singing from the same hymn sheet. Often what we will do is, when content has been created by a marketing team, we'll look at it from a PR standpoint, and we'll think about the types of messages that we can use within the marketing content for thought leadership articles. We will also use those for media hooks to try and secure interviews and media commentaries, for example. So that's one way that we work. But then also, we found with some of our clients, a campaign has been very much PR led. So a recent example, one of our clients, they identified a key trend in the industry, and they wanted to find out a little bit more about what this trend meant to them, what it meant to their partners, their customers. So we were tasked with really researching this. So this involved a lot of sourcing calls, desk research, looking through analyst reports. And once we'd kind of gathered everything together and we really understood what this trend meant, but also what it meant for our client and how they could play to it, we then presented all of those findings to the marketing and the marketing intelligence team, and with all of the other agencies on board as well. So, it's a pretty big meeting. We shared all of the messages. We then, off the back of that, created some media pitches, some thought leadership content. Once that had been created, then the marketing team then took that and used our content, the PR content, for their marketing campaign. So it really shows that it can be led by marketing, and it sometimes also can be led by PR as well.
Yeah, and that's absolutely music to my ears. And I think, some of the key learnings that we've developed, working for many years together on projects, is it isn't always one directional. It can be that bi-directional relationship of things that the PR and the comms team, you've got your finger on the pulse of listening to the market and seeing the trends and what is resonating with the audience. And it's very, very important to feed that back. It should be a two-way thing here, rather than the traditional campaign or the traditional marketing team coming up with all of the messaging and the campaign and then leaning on the PR and the comms team to then, turn that into some newsworthy articles. I think looking at the structure and kind of the best practices that you see is to look at it kind of fourfold, that you've got the reputation part of it, which is where obviously PR and comms sit. You have the demand gen part, you then have the sales enablement or employee enablement side of it, and then market intelligence. And when you start to look at that holistically, the best practice would be that it becomes that fluid feeding backwards and forwards of what you're seeing in the market, then drives into then the campaign development and the key marketing messages. So I think that's, a fantastic end goal for the people today, to kind of look at that and think about it from a bi-directional perspective. So yeah, really, really great insights there. So anything else that you've seen, whether it is examples or, case studies, there's some best practices where they've got to that point, and any kind of key learnings that you've seen and anything you'd like to share today? Yeah,
sure. Yeah, so there is an example I'd like to share with you. We did some work for a client, a leading provider of software in the telco space. They were really keen to gain some insight into the industry, and having that insight in the industry is obviously going to put them in good stead with their customers and hopefully, position them well against their competitors. So we commissioned an analyst to write a white paper based on a lot of research that the analyst did themselves. And once we had that content in the form of a white paper, we then looked at it from a PR and a marketing standpoint very closely with our client, just to think, how can we really make this work for us, and how can we drive mileage? So, almost thinking about using that content to kind of drip feed, not only to prospects and customers, but also to our media as well. So there was different stages within this campaign. The first stage was basically looking at the content and creating all of the marketing assets, so having them all completely ready. The first stage of actually using the content was posting some blogs onto the client's website to almost introduce the concept of what this new white paper was telling people. So it was, very much introducing it and kind of drip feeding it. And then the next stage was using the key results, key findings from the white paper and putting them into a press release, and then issuing that press release to all of our key telco and business computing media. And then once that had sort of, generated a bit of coverage, we then hosted a roundtable. So this was for some key UK telco media. It was also for the analyst and also for the client. And around this roundtable, everyone was able to discuss the findings in a bit more detail and really go into quite a deep level. And during the roundtable, we held lots of one-to-one interviews, which then created some really, really great in-depth guest article thought leadership content. And I think the thing that worked so well is that once that coverage hit, because all the marketing materials were ready, our client was then ready to go with their lead generation campaign. So obviously, he'd already started introducing the concept online through these blogs. There was also a lot of press coverage that we'd seen, so from the press release, but also the interviews and the thought leadership content. And then he was then able to use all of the content that we had created. So that was emails, social media posts, blogs. The white paper was kept as a gated asset on the website to drive more leads. And yeah, just kind of, it all sort of came together and worked really, really well. I think the time period for that campaign was probably over at least 6 months. In terms of the initial phase. And I believe now, obviously, that content is probably still being used in prospect meetings for sure.
Yeah. And I think, again, some of the key learnings have been to look at this from a more of a longer term view and have the longevity you mentioned there about running the campaign over 6 months. And I think looking at that evergreen type of content does extend the life of campaigns. A campaign shouldn't be, in alignment with PR, it shouldn't be, a 2-week activity. We need to start looking at these like longer term themes, building out that longevity of the campaign. So you have your blog program, you have your email nurture tracks, and the whole thing then starts to become kind of that fully integrated marketing that we're all striving towards. So I think that's been a fantastic case study. Just as well, we always like on these sessions to share some actionable tips and tricks. So if there's anything, from what we've, discussed over the last 10 minutes, where there's any kind of tips and tricks to share with the audience, it would be great if you could do that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. So I would say, it goes without saying that planning is absolutely key to this, and making sure that right from the start, as I said before, you are collaborating as a team. So not working in silos, making sure that the marketing and the PR team are working together from day one. What we've found that's worked really well in-house, but also agency side, is having a living content calendar. So a live calendar that people can kind of contribute to, because, sometimes, even if you are one team, sometimes the PR team doesn't know what the marketing team's doing, and vice versa. So it's really important to have like one live kind of campaign content calendar, so people can dip in and, if they're working with a particular prospect and, they know that prospect is interested in a certain something, they can use that piece of content. And likewise for the PR team, they can use certain bits of content that they think a journalist would be interested in. And I hate to quote a motto, but I do think that the motto of think globally, but act locally is really, really, really important this year. As I said before, because obviously, the budgets, the resource, everything is tightened. So, I think it makes sense that if a campaign is going to come from a global team, it needs to be really flexible and really, really adaptable. Thinking back to what I was saying about the teams collaborating, if they are working in close collaboration, so marketing and PR teams, but globally and locally, the global team will really, really understand what will resonate well within a UK media landscape, for example, or a German media landscape, but also the same for customers and prospects. So, it's really important that when this content gets created, it can be adapted and it can be localized. I think another point that I wanted to make is that it's so important to remember that content can be repurposed for many different audiences. So, you know, from a marketing perspective, like I said earlier, you know, we will often look at marketing content for PR. We'll pull out those key hooks and we'll use them for media opportunities, executive commentary, guest articles, etc. But then also it's important to note that it can work the other way as well. So on occasion, we have worked with our clients. We've come up with a great idea. We've pitched it to a journalist. The journalist has liked it, but he's asked to tweak it based on his own insights, based on what he's hearing from other vendors, other distributors, resellers, and asked us to tweak it because he feels that if it's tweaked, it will resonate a bit better with his audience. And what we've done is we've then taken that idea to our client and said, oh, they've liked the idea, but they want it, the journalist wants it tweaked a little bit because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes what's happened is the clients loved it. And they've said, oh, that's a great idea, taken it to the marketing team. And before we know it, it's triggered a really great idea for a marketing campaign.
Yeah. And I think that's the utopia that we're all trying to strive towards, is to listen to the market and adapt, be flexible and agile enough to be able to adapt your key marketing messages and to drive the content plan as well. So I think that's really really great and key learnings. With I think the outcome being for the audience today of look at this for the alignment, have those early planning calls and interlock sessions where you bring in the PR and the comms team very early, so you can align on that messaging, and also so that everyone has visibility on those hero pieces of content that you can turn into those many content derivatives as we've discussed. Also listen, there's a listening part to this as well, as you were just saying in that example. So that's been absolutely fantastic, Lisa, and really kind of appreciate the insights that you've gained over the years, and particularly working with TechComms in the B2B tech space. I think that's an area where this is absolutely key to make sure that you get it right, to really build on that rising tide. So thank you so much for spending the last 10 to 15 minutes of kind of giving us a little bit of a taster of the capabilities of you and the team at TechComms. So we really appreciate you being part of the Slice of Pie video blog series. So thank you very much, Lisa. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.